Ah, good.
Hey, we're recording.
I heard it.
So welcome to the DFW Friends of IANS meeting. We meet the second Wednesday of the month, every month except for August at 7 p.m. Central Time, and we go for a couple of hours. Since we have been using Zoom as our platform, it allows us to call on live speakers who could be anywhere in the world. So our meetings generally will either have a live speaker or we'll watch a video, and we'll follow up with Q&A and general discussion. I haven't ever been to a meeting where all we do is kind of circle up and tell stories, or talk about our own experiences, but I understand that that's happened as well. The only caveat that we have at IANS is that we don't like to see a lot of preaching and proselytizing and that kind of stuff. And we've never really had much trouble with that, but I do mention it. And I would like to introduce our speaker for this evening. It's Penny is it Wittbrodt?
Yes.
Yes. And I met Penny on Facebook and serendipitously. And then I just thought, well, let's just see if she'd like to tell her story to our group. So, and she was very graciously said that she would do so. So I don't have much more to add to that. If there's nothing else to add, I'll just let Penny begin telling her story, and we can go from there.
That sounds good. I did want to say that I spent time in Texas, so I feel like I kind of am attached to you guys. I went to high school in Granbury, Texas, and graduated from high school there, which is somewhere around Fort Worth, I'm not sure. Yeah. And then I went to college in, isn't that terrible? It's been that long. I'll be 50 this year. Where is it?
Stephenville,
yes. Yeah. They had hitching posts outside the Piggly Wiggly when I lived there for the Amish people. I'd never seen anything like it. But yeah, I went to college there for a semester before I moved back to Michigan and roundabouts got to Kentucky. But anyway, I really liked Texas growing up. Penny Wittbrodt, and I'm a nurse. I got my nursing license in 2002, and I did mostly critical care my entire nursing career. I did a little bit of home health and some community volunteer nursing for people that didn't have insurance. And what else did I do? A little bit of nursing home stuff, not a whole lot, but mostly just critical care or critical care step down. So where people are in the ICU and they've kind of exceeded their number of Medicare days, so they'll put them in a step down unit. And that's what I was doing until, I don't know, about 6 years ago, I guess. And I had been attacked by a patient. So we were putting a line in a patient, an IV line in his neck. And he was lucid and everything. He's an eye doctor and he just was mean. And we had him in one of those reclining chairs. And our director knew that he was violent because he had knocked her down on the day of admission, but she didn't tell any of us that. And we had these daily safety meetings and she just forgot to mention it, I guess. And so he had one of those beds. I don't know if you've seen them. We can take patients' beds and put them really close to the floor. And he would get out of bed and he'd have some falls. So we had his bed really low. And so I'm in between that bed and the reclining chair, and the doctor is on the other side with his nurse. So the patient I was kind of walking him through what we were doing. You're going to feel something cold on your neck and then a sting. And he just kind of bolted up in that chair and he said, "I don't give consent for this." And he punched me in the side of the head and I fell between the bed and the chair. And he hit the doctor and knocked the tray off. And the doctor was trying to unlock the chair to pull him off me, but couldn't figure out how to get it unlocked. And so he just kind of came over the chair and just kept punching me in the side of the head. And so I finally Tech hears the whole mess and comes over and unlocks the chair and gets him off me. And I finished my shift because I'm a nurse and that's what you do. And the next day I woke up and I was having trouble. If I would turn my head to the side, my vision would get weird. And I thought, man, something's not right. And my wrist was hurting and my elbow or my wrist was hurting and my shoulder was hurting. And so I called in and said that I needed to see the doctor. So they sent me over, and I had broken my wrist and torn my rotator cuff, and they didn't diagnose anything with my neck at the time. Well, that was in August, and in November, it was getting worse. If I turned my head to the left at all, I would completely lose my vision. And so the arm guy that I had said, we're going to send you for an MRI and see what's going on. And so he sent me, and he said, this guy's really conservative. It'll be, no matter what's wrong with you, it's going to be a year before he does surgeries, just like that. And so I went on a Tuesday, and he showed me my MRI, and he said, this is bad. We have to do surgery this week. And so he'd scheduled it for Thursday, and I had to, in the meantime, go for this work comp evaluation. And that was just disastrous. And so I go, and this doctor who like can't even get malpractice insurance anymore. I go in with my husband, and he's like, oh, she's got full range of motion on her neck and her arm and all these different things, and looked at my MRI and said it was fine. And I can remember when I went back to the doctor the day before my surgery, he actually wrote, and you won't see doctors do this much. He wrote in the chart, he said, this person either doesn't know how to, or has never read an MRI, or he's a liar, because there was no way you could look at that MRI and think it was okay. And so they scheduled me for surgery the next day. I had to get the declination of coverage service from work comp, so my insurance would cover it. And they told my husband, they said, an hour and a half, 2 hours tops. Well, it was 6 hours, because those discs in between the fourth and fifth cervical vertebrae, and the fifth and sixth had like exploded, and there was just little pieces of disc everywhere. So they used hardware to screw my neck back together, and got all of that disc out. And they used, I can't remember whether it was some kind of bone glue or cadaver bone, because they'd talked about both, but they used one of those. So I had the surgery, I went home, I was in that stiff neck brace 24 hours a day for February, almost to March. And by then I was kind of getting in the soft brace. And then by August, I still wasn't back to work because I couldn't do any lifting or anything. And I had some nerve damage that went down into my hand. And I was just having a normal day. I was in the kitchen with my daughter, we're drinking smoothies, and I suddenly felt like I couldn't breathe. And I'm like, what is this? You know, and at first it was kind of, I don't know if y'all have ever had that, where you feel like you just have to keep taking really deep sighing kind of breaths. And it felt like that at first. And then it felt like I couldn't swallow my spit. And I'm like, okay, this is getting bad. Well, I had a history of anaphylactic reactions to shellfish, but I hadn't had any shellfish. So, but I knew what it felt like. And so I was just getting worse and worse. And I noticed my lips were bluing up. And so I had EpiPens there, epinephrine. And so I gave myself a shot, and my son took me to the emergency room. And so I get there, and this is a small town hospital. And I had worked there for a little while because they were expanding their ICU. So I'd taken a job there to help with that. And I went into the ER, and when I saw the nurse, I thought, oh no, I'm going to die. Because I knew her. And she said, you've already taken your epinephrine. Why would you come to the emergency room? And I thought, yes, I'm definitely going to die today. I said, because people are supposed to come to the emergency room if they have to take epinephrine. And she just thought the whole thing was foolishness. And I was all broke out in hives. I was looking up like this, talking, because it felt like if I put my head down, I couldn't breathe. And I was wheezing just very loudly. I just looked awful. And she put me in a wheelchair, and she took me back, and she said, we don't have a room for you right now. The room's clean, but we don't have a bed. I said, I don't care. Just put me in there. And she said, no, we're not allowed to do that without a bed. So she puts me in the hallway by myself and just leaves me there. And so I'm getting worse and worse. And I had my second EpiPen, because they come in 2-packs. And I thought, I'm going to have to use this. And so I give myself another injection of epinephrine, sit in the hall for probably another half hour. And then I developed stridor, which is this kind of really high-pitched breathing sound you get as your airways closing. And so a doctor heard it. She came around the corner, and she looked down the hall to see what was going on. And she's like, oh my God. And they get me up in the bed, and they can't get an IV because my veins have all flattened out from the anaphylaxis. And they just throw everything, and they're like, come on, let's get her across the hall. And then I knew for sure I was going to die, because we were going to the trauma room. And so we go across the hall, we get into the trauma room, And I've got nurses on either side injecting me with Benadryl and more epinephrine. And finally somebody gets a really janky IV in and they start steroids. And I was better for a little while. Like I'd do better for 15 or 20 minutes. And then it just would start all over again. And so I kept having this refractory anaphylaxis. And my husband gets there and he walks in and he sees me and he tells the doctor, he says, you need to intubate her. You're going to lose her airway. And he says, no, we've got plenty of time before that happens. And he walks out of the room and 5 minutes later, I quit breathing and fall over. And almost as soon as my head hit that pillow, I popped out of my body. And so I was up above myself looking down and I didn't realize that was me. And so I was looking down at this person in the bed and I thought, man, she looks rough. She's probably not going to live. I hope she's okay. And then I heard the code call go off and all these people run into the room and I knew who they were, even though I was unconscious. And they pushed Don out into the hallway and he's standing in the hallway and I'm watching him and they get the little tongue blade open and they're going to intubate me. And I didn't see that part. So they had the IV in and they were pulling drugs out into syringes and they gave those in the IV and then I was just out. And so when I woke up, like not in my body, I was in the back seat of my sister's car who was driving from Wisconsin. And I couldn't figure out how I'd gotten into the back seat of this car. And it didn't feel right. Like I couldn't feel the seat against my legs and I couldn't feel the back of the seat against my back. And I didn't feel as thick as I normally do. And I didn't weigh the same or something. It was really weird. And so I had this idea. I knew she didn't know I was in the back seat. And I didn't know like if I leaned forward, if I would scare her or it just is a strange situation. And so it was pouring down rain. And I thought, what on earth? Why is she driving in this weather? It's awful. And I thought maybe something had happened to the kids or her husband. And I leaned forward and she had the most awful outfit on. And she's a redhead. And she had clothes on that were completely mismatched and wrinkled. And I thought, did she dress in the dark in a hurt? Why is she dressed like this? Where is she going? And she pulls over underneath the canopy at a gas station. And she fishes out her phone and she gets it. She opens her Facebook app and she types in, hang on, kiddo, I'm coming. And it was so weird to see that later because I'd seen her do it. And then I was out again. And so I come back to consciousness and I'm in this really dark, like the darkest room you've ever been in. And I didn't know how big it was. Like, was I in a closet or was I in, just a super dark Walmart? I had no idea. I couldn't figure out how big it was. But I still had this like image of me floating in this darkness. Like I knew what I looked like, even though there wasn't enough light. And I felt this crazy pressure on me, just my whole body. Like I thought maybe I was wrapped in something. And so I took my hand and I ran it down my arm and there was nothing there. And that really freaked me out. And I'm crazy claustrophobic. And I tried to move and I couldn't move. And then I'm really freaking out because I'm so claustrophobic. And I'm just trying to take breaths and there's so much weight on my chest, I can't breathe. And then I just go out again. And so I wake back up and I'm still in the dark place. And this goes on for a very long time. If I had to put it in human years or earth years, I guess, it would have been 10 years. That's exactly what it felt like. And I couldn't figure out why I was there, how I'd gotten there. I started wondering if the life that I was remembering had ever really happened. I thought maybe I just made that up because I've been here for so long and I needed something to think about. And, maybe if it did exist, maybe I did something wrong or something happened and I just got plucked out of it and nobody remembers me and I'm just lost somewhere. And it was just crazy scary because I didn't know how to get out of it. And I started where I was just praying for the deep sleep, that it would just come get me and swallow me up because I didn't want to wake up in that place anymore. And so that would happen intermittently for a long, long time. And then one time I woke up and something told me to lean forward. And so I leaned forward. And when I did, I started to move forward a little bit. And I was like, holy cow, that's it. If I lean forward, I can move. And so I leaned forward and then I started thinking forward, and so I'm kind of like in this tilted position going this direction. And the more I thought forward, 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 the faster I could go. And so I see a light up ahead, and I'm like, I'm gonna aim for that. There's something going on over there. So I get to this light, and it's coming out of what seems like a room. And so there's this barrier, and it looks like, it's hard to describe. It's like a thick membrane, like I couldn't push through it, and it looked distorted to look through. It was clear, but you know how they used to make this really thick, these glass squares that they would use in bathrooms, and it kind of looked like that, or looking through broken ice or something like that. And so I looked through, and I couldn't tell what was on the other side, but that's where the light was coming from. And so I leaned forward a little bit closer and looked, and the longer I looked, the clearer it got on the other side. And I could see a hospital room bed, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm alive. That's me, I'm alive. This is amazing. I get better, I can get back in my body. This would be incredible. And it was just the first little bit of bright news that I'd had the whole time I was there. And so I was watching me in the room, and I could see the monitor that was over the bed that had all my vital signs on it. And I looked at that and kind of assessed the vital signs. And I thought, that's weird. I kind of understand what all that means. And then I looked at the IV pumps, and they had different drugs hanging. And I looked at the drip rates on the drugs. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, yes, that's correct. And I thought, how do I know that? And then I remembered I had been a nurse. I had completely forgotten that. And I thought, okay. And so I kind of summed me up. I looked at the ventilator and the ventilator settings, and I thought, okay, you're critical but stable. So there's something to be worked with. And I was restrained. I had wrist restraints on tied to the bed. And I noticed when I looked at the ventilator that my daughter was standing in front of it. And so the bed was kind of like this. She's over here to my right, and the vent's behind her. And I can hear it doing its little churning thing. And I looked at her, and she had this red shirt on. It looked like kind of like a flannel shirt, which I thought was weird because it was summer. And she had it tied at the waist. And I remember thinking how soft it looked. I could see the fabric of it just really clearly. And I was watching her, and she kind of looked down at me laying on the bed, and I felt her feelings. Like, not empathy, like I felt exactly what she was feeling, the way she was feeling it, with the intensity that she felt it. And she was scared, and she was worried, and I could tell she was really scared I was going to die. And so it just broke my heart that she was scared about that, because I didn't want her to worry. And I put my hands forward just kind of intuitively to grab her and pull her to me, and my hands hit the wall, and I lost it. I was pounding on the wall and screaming and yelling. I was so mad that I couldn't get through that wall. And so when I freaked out and started trying to beat up the wall, I got sucked back into the dark place again. And so when I woke up, but I knew how to move now. So I woke up, and I'm like, okay, let's see if it still works. And I bent forward, and I started to move. And so I went back to where the membrane was, but this time it was thinner. And so I pushed my hands against it. And when I pushed hard, my hands went through, and they were on the other side. And that was the coolest thing ever, because I was like, oh my gosh, part of me is on that side. That's where I am, you know? And so I pushed a little harder, and my arms went through, and then I popped through. And I just thought this was great. And I wondered, like, if maybe I would get soaked back into me like a sponge. I wasn't sure exactly how this sort of thing was handled. You know, I figured the spirit world had some sort of plan for it. I just didn't know what it was. And so I was floating above me, and I was alone in the room, or my body was alone. And so I looked down. I refer to me as her because it seemed like a different person. So I'm looking down at her, and I thought, if I could get her to open her eyes, then everybody would know that she's in there. And then maybe I could, if she wakes up, then maybe I'll just get sucked back in. And so I'm floating over, and I'm just staring at her eyes and willing her to open them, and she won't do it. And I keep trying, and I keep trying, and I'm just getting so frustrated because she's just laying there obstinately, not doing anything I'm trying to get her to do. And maybe I should start smaller. And so I focused on her pinky finger, and I was just staring at it. And I remember seeing the wrist restraints tied to the bed, and I didn't like that. And I kept looking at her finger and looking at her finger, and I could not, for the life of me, get her to move it. I had no impact on this person. I was just completely disconnected from her. And so I get mad and I get sucked back onto the other side. And now I'm just on the other side of the wall. And I started wondering, this doesn't make sense. There's got to be a reason I'm here. And why would I see the other side if I can't get back? That's just torture. And so I was really upset. And I was like, you know what? Look, either kill me or save me, because I can't do this anymore. I don't want to go back into the deep sleep, and I don't want to be in the dark place. And I don't want my body just to lay there, motionless like that forever. So either kill me or send me back. And it didn't work. I was pretty frustrated that it didn't work. And I started thinking more on it. I thought, what could this place be? What have I done something? Why am I here? And it just suddenly became clear. Like when I finally asked the question, the right question, the answer came. And I looked around and I could see the darkness of this place, which is such a weird thing to say, because if a room is completely dark, you can't see anything, but I could see. And I looked around and I thought, I built this. That's why I'm here. I built this. When I was in that body, I isolated myself so badly that I built this. I put these bricks around me and I just kept stacking them. Every time I got hurt, I'd stack a brick and stack a brick and stack a brick. And I was keeping people away. But what I didn't realize was I had built my own prison and I was my jailer. And it was this moment. I don't know. I don't think I've ever had clarity like that. And I heard this cracking noise. I grew up in Michigan, and in Michigan, when the lakes start to thaw, you hear these really loud cracks, and then they start out loud, and then they get quieter and quieter as they go further out of the lake. And it's and we'd been on the lake when it had happened, and so you kind of race back because you don't want to fall in. And I heard that sort of cracking noise, but it was thunderous. And the void split, kind of like an egg at the top. And the spirits just kind of came down to where I was. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's things up there. I'm not by myself. And so here she comes. And she was big, like grand, she was big in size, but it was more than that. And she was just kind of standing there in front of me, and I felt like I knew her. And I kept looking at her and thinking that I knew her from somewhere. And she just like willed me into her arms. And so now I'm in her arms and she's holding me close and I'm crying. And her spirit is just going like this around us, like this tornado, but it was really peaceful in her arms. And so she held me closer to her chest, and I was just overcome. And she puts one arm around me like this, and then she punches out her other fist. And when she did it, the void exploded. And so all of it, there were just these black shards flying around in this bright light. And all the little pieces were trying to get in to where I was. And I was really scared that they were going to get me and somehow take me back. And so the shards would hit kind of that tornado of energy that was around us, and they would blow up into little tiny pieces, and they were just gone. So every time one hit, it would blow up and the light would be brighter. And so I'm in her arms and I'm crying, just crazy crying. And I look up and she's got these just brilliant emerald green eyes. And I'm thinking, man, I know her. Who is this person? And I'm looking at her eyes, and I'm crying. And she says, calm yourself, dear one. And it was like, I don't know if y'all have ever had surgery, but you know how they give you that drug and you couldn't keep your eyes open if you tried. You're just that relaxed. You can feel it kind of go through you. That's what it was like. It was like being given sedation. And I just was super relaxed. And I could feel like she didn't say it, but I heard it in her voice and I recognized her voice, but nothing came out of her mouth. It just went from her mind to my mind in her voice. And the words kind of got all broken down, and then they just were coursing through me, and I was calm. And I was trying to remember how I knew her, and I looked up and she had this red hair on her head that was so bright it looked like it was on fire, and it was like alive. It was moving like firewood. And I knew who she was. In that moment, I knew who she was. And I said, that's my grandmother. So it was my mom's mom, Levita. And she had died when I was 9, I think the summer I turned 10. And it was sudden. And she had gotten diagnosed with cancer in June before we were out of school, and she was dead before the 4th of July. And she was young. And so I guess I mean, I always had believed in heaven and that we went on and things like that, but it was weird to see it be true. You know what I mean? Like in life, I had hoped it would be true. And I was really sweating that, you know, because I thought, what if I die and it's not true? And it is nothing like everybody says. And I was so overjoyed that she was there, and she was like more her than I had ever remembered her being. And it was just amazing. And in life, she was just a force to be reckoned with. She worked at a steel stamping plant in Michigan. And I can remember she would come home just wringing wet. She was a bigger lady, like, I don't even know how tall she was, but quite a bit taller than me. I'm 5'1", and I think she was probably at least 5'6". And she was kind of built bigger on the top. And she had no butt, and these skinny little legs and this red hair. And she was just amazing. And she lived in our upstairs. There was a apartment over our house, and she lived there. And she worked in these steel stamping plants or metal stamping. And I remember her coming home because they were trying to start a union. One of her friends had gotten, and this would have been in like early 70s. One of her friends was working, and she got her hand caught in one of the presses, and it pulled her arm in and caused a horrible injury. And then she just lost her job. There wasn't work comp or anything to protect her. And she was a friend of my grandmother's, and it just went all over my grandmother. And so she was trying to start a union. And women did not do that in those days. Men even faced quite a bit of trouble if they did that sort of thing. And so she was working with people trying to bring the Teamsters in to that plant so that they would have some union coverage. And I remember one day she didn't come home from work. And she didn't come home. And I was sitting on the front porch waiting for her, and she didn't come home, and she didn't come home. And I kept asking my mom where she was. And Mom didn't know. And it was almost dark. And this black car pulled up in front of our house, and the door opened, and my grandmother was shoved out into the street. And she got up and she came into the house, and she was just frantic. And my mom asked her what happened. And she said, they came and they got me, and they told me if I didn't quit, I was going to end up in the Detroit River. And they took her to the river. And she didn't let that stop her because she was crazy. And I just always loved that about her, that she just had an energy and a spirit about her that you couldn't resist. And I remember she would come to New Year's, or she would come to a party, and it just didn't start until she got there. And she was just easy to make laugh, and she was joyful, and she had a hard, hard life. But it never robbed her, you know, it never robbed her. She got through. And I mean, when I say she had a hard life, she had a hard life. And so there she was, you know, and she was just bigger than I could have remembered. And it was just amazing. And so she was holding me in her arms, and I asked her, and it was so funny because I could think something and it would immediately, whatever it was, like you can thought create there. So if you think flowers, there they are, there's no delay. And it's so much more convenient than it is here. It's such hard work here. And I was in her arms, and I thought, I wondered if I was dead. And she said, oh, no. She said, there's no death. And I was kind of shocked. And she said, no. She said, your body can become useless and be cast away, but there's no death. She said, you're either alive in your body or you're super alive here on this side. And she said, you know this. Do you remember? And I'm thinking, I don't know this. I don't know what she's talking about, you know? And she said, remember when you were little in science, they taught you this. Energy's not created or destroyed. It just changes forms. And she said, that's God's rule borrowed by man. And I was just like, dang, you're smart. And I had known that my whole life. And it was funny because it didn't occur to me that it was true with everything, like people. And apparently it is. And so it was just this incredible, like she would know just how to say things so that I would understand them. I didn't have to sort anything out. When she would say something, I didn't even have to work to remember it. Like here, somebody will tell me something and I'll try to link it to other details so I can remember that thing. But it was just effortless. It was just in you because she said it. And so there I was in her arms, and I started crying again. And like weeping. It was different. It was like grief. And she just kind of let me have it, you know, just have that moment. And I was so broken over everything I had seen in life, you know, everything bad that had happened to me and happened to my kids that I couldn't change, and every horrible thing that I had seen happen in the world that I felt powerless to change. And I started thinking about all the people who really believed and promoted the idea that when you die, that's it. You just lay in a grave and that's the end of it. And there's nothing after that. And it broke my heart for them. And I thought, how must that be to get to the end of your life believing that and thinking every part of all that's good and wonderful and magical about who you are is just over. And I couldn't imagine a God that would let that be. I'm like, why would you make something so amazing? Because we were just amazing. Just to watch it rot in the ground, that just didn't make sense to me. And it broke my heart that people believed it. And I was just broken up and crying. And she did it again. She pulled back from me a little bit and she looked at me and she said, calm yourself, dear one. And I did. I was like, whoa, you know, I couldn't even really hold myself. And I was just kind of thinking about, you know, her being there and me being there. And I don't know, just how amazing it was to see her again. And I got lost in that. And I didn't realize she'd left. I realized that she's gone and that I'm just floating in this light. And all of a sudden, it's crazy. All of a sudden, everything started shaking. Like everything. Not everything in your room or everything on your street. Everything that had ever existed or that will ever exist. Everything that you could see and that you couldn't see. Things that you knew and you didn't know about. All of that was shaken to my presence, and it's in front of me. And it says, I am. And I knew immediately. I'm like, it's God. And I had remembered that from, you know, just Bible studies and stuff when I was a little kid, you know, the great I am. And I wasn't confused when he said it. I wasn't, there was no doubt of whose presence I was in, and that it was God, and that I was not him, and he wasn't him. It was just light. But, you know, for lack of better term to refer to this entity that was with me. And I was a little shocked that there wasn't an old guy with a beard. And, you know, I mean, I had an imagination of what that would be like, and it just wasn't like that. And everything was shaking, and then it just stopped. And my brain stopped. Everything got quiet. And he said it again. And then I got scared. I was like, oh, yeah. And I started thinking about like everything I had ever done in my life that I did not want him to talk about with him, you know. And I'm not like a horrible person, but we've all got stuff we've done, you know, that just like if God were standing right there, you probably would have picked some other thing. And I thought, oh, well, here we go. This is going to be bad and embarrassing and every other thing. And it wasn't like that. It wasn't like that at all. This kind of what I can best describe as a video that feels like you're in it, just surrounds us. And I can see scenes from my life playing out. And there was, and I was super worried about what was going to pop up. And he said, he was like calming me down that there wasn't anything to worry about, that, you know, he wasn't upset about anything. We were just going to look through this together. And so the scenes start playing out, and there is a scene where I'm in a grocery store, and I had completely forgotten about it because it was such a small thing. But I was behind this woman in line, and she didn't have enough money for her groceries. And I had been a single mom most of my kids' lives. And I remembered what that was like, to stand at the checkout and be embarrassed because you didn't have enough money to pay and try to figure out what you needed to put back so that you could get out of the grocery store with some of your groceries. And she was apologizing and she was embarrassed. And I could feel all those feelings she was having, that shame of not, you know, of being 72 cents short. And so I dug through my wallet and I gave her the change, and she was so grateful. And I'm like, it's okay. It's okay. I've been there. And God showed me her life going forward. Sorry. And I was dumbstruck by how one little thing, you know, and it wasn't the thing I would have showed him. Of all the things I was proud of having done in my life, that wouldn't have even made the list. But I saw her going forward and how it changed her life and all the ripple effects out from that. And I saw her working at a food pantry and packing up groceries for another mom. I was like, wow, I never realized, that it was that important, just the little things. And so then we started kind of going through the stuff that I wasn't so happy about. And he pulled up a scene that I had not remembered, but was true of my life. It was a good sum up. And it was this scene of me thinking mean thoughts about this other person who actually deserved them. And I was just thinking, that person is just terrible. They're just an awful person and they don't care about anybody but themselves. And all those things were true. And then God showed me everything that had led up to that in that person's life. And then I felt about this big, I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that that had happened to her. And, I didn't know that her dad did all those things to her. I had no idea about all that stuff. But he wasn't like upset with me or anything. And he says, when you think those thoughts, there's energy to that. And when you speak them, there's even more energy to it. And God forbid you act on it. And he said, just having those thoughts about her gets out. It gets out in the world, and it gets on her. And it makes her harder to be better. It makes it harder for her to be better because now you've attached more of that to her. And so going forward, her being terrible is partly your fault because instead of thinking kind things and praying good things on her, you've focused on the bad qualities she has, and that makes it harder for her to get out from under it. And that was such a good word for me because I was never a person to gossip, and I always hated it. And I always assumed that anybody was gossiping was probably talking about me too. And so and it's bad in nursing. You see a lot of it in nursing. And I would just leave. People would be standing there and they'd be talking bad about somebody, and I'd just turn around and walk away in the middle of the conversation because I wasn't going to do it. And so I hadn't been a person that had done that a lot, but I had shared frustrations, about something that somebody had done before without giving them any grace discussing it. And so that really changed a lot for me about how I saw people and how I interpret their actions. And, then I got angry and I was mad at God. And I said, I'm not mad that the kid's dad left when they were little and had basically nothing to do with them afterward. I'm not upset that he did it to me. I'm upset that he did it to them. And I was mad at God for, I don't know, just not fixing it. I knew he could fix it. I knew he could do anything. And he said, my goodness, you've completely misunderstood me. Let me show you something. And so he shows me this scene, and I'm sitting in bleachers and I'm next to my son. And so when all of this happened, my grandson was 2. And in the scene, my grandson's about 5. And I'm sitting next to my son, David, and Cole, my grandson, is running on this field and he's playing soccer. And I remember what the air smelled like and what the heat of the day felt like and what it looked like, the sun looked like shining on his hair as he ran up and down the field and just how full of life he was. And my son is sitting next to me and he you can just see him kind of beaming watching his son play soccer. And he looks at me and he says, well, if I can get through this part. He looks at me and he says, I'm going to be the dad to him that I deserve. Wow, I felt like we picked this life specifically for what it could teach us, that we weren't put in it by accident, that the lessons were meaningful and they were important. And I thought, if that's the kind of good that comes from all of the bad, okay. It sucks and it's terrible. And I would have totally picked different. But he is the dad to his son that he deserved. And it's so funny because I went with him to a soccer game when Cole was 5 and he looked at me and he said those exact words. And so it was this scene from the future, and I thought, wow, what a good God. What a good God. How kind is that, to let me see that come full circle and turn to good. And I just, in that moment, there was no question that I was loved, that fixing it would be nice, but it robs you of things. It robs you of things you really need going forward. And it robbed me of it would have robbed me of that moment of seeing my son overcome in such a big way. And so I remember thinking, I'm okay with the darkness, I'm okay that I had to spend time there to figure out my life. And I'm okay with the light. I'm okay with all of it. And there was this moment where I was there with God, and I just felt like I had this opportunity to build a wall with him or just to let it all down. And it was scary. I have to tell you, it was scary. People think it sounds easy, but it's not. That's a very vulnerable position to be in with somebody that powerful. And I just did it. I did it. I'm like, I'm not going to put the wall up. And so the light kind of comes around me, and it starts at my toes, and I can feel it going into my toes. And it was just this crazy, weird sensation. And there was like a vibration to it. The vibration of it had like its own resonance that was like a song. I remember afterwards, I'll have to ask Don what key it was. Don, can't hear me. After I came back, I heard this key. Don played a key on the piano, and it took me back there. And I'm like, what key is that? What key is that? And I can't remember whether he said it was G or D. And I'm like, that's the sound that God made. And so this light and vibration kind of goes into my toes, and then it comes up my legs, and it gets in my middle. And it was like kind of swirling around in my middle, fixing all those, you know how when something bad or scary happens, you have this sort of visceral gut reaction. Well, that like stays imprinted in there somehow. And going forward in life, I always describe it as that feeling like when you got in trouble at school and you got off the bus or you were walking home and you knew you were going to get it when you got home because you knew the teacher had called your dad, that stuff. We see the rest of our lives through those kind of visceral reactions, and we can make ourselves sick. And God was in there like fixing that. And he started like swirling around in my middle. And it was like he was putting this cloak or something on my spirit, and just this cloak of light. And it came up and it got in my chest, and I could feel it going through my heart, and just loving me, just loving me. And it came up through my neck, and it got in my mouth, and my tongue like lit up. And I was just singing this beautiful song, and I'm a horrible singer, so that was really shocking. And I was like, oh, wow, that's beautiful. I wish I could do that all the time. And then it started kind of going up, and I felt it moving up like behind my eyes. And I thought, oh no, it's going to get out. And so I squeezed my eyes shut because I didn't want any of it to leak out. But you can't do that. You can't keep it in because it's, this love, you can't stop it. And so I'm squeezing my eyes shut, and it shines through the lids, and it shoots out the ends of my eyelashes. And I open my eyes, and it hits God's light on the outside, and it goes back in. And it was powerful that it reflected off him and came back through. And so then it goes up through my brain, and I can feel it going through like all the curves in my brain, and like parts of my brain that apparently do not work on this side were working really well there. And I could see things more vividly, and I could hear things really sharp, and it was just incredible. And so then we start, he's like pulling me closer to him. And it was weird because he was around me and in me and through me. And it was just such a penetrative experience all the way around. And to have him still on the outside was really weird. And so I like pull closer to him, and I have this opportunity again to decide to go on this part with him or not. And I just kind of surrendered to it. And we start going through my DNA together. And I can feel the strands of it going over my skin as we're going through, like, like your mom would stroke you or something like that to soothe you. And it was just such an amazing feeling. And we're going through the DNA, and, I'm just kind of seeing how I was made. And he said, do you see me here? And he said, look, I'm here. I'm in you. I'm in you. I made you. And it was crazy because I always had this idea of God being this external force, and it wasn't like that. It was like he was as intimately involved in my creation as my parents were. And I felt him, like I could see back to my beginning, and like he was putting me together on purpose, and that's important. On purpose is important, because on purpose means there's a purpose, and it means that there's something more and something you're supposed to be doing. And so we're just going through this, and we're going really fast. I'd never moved that fast before. I mean, it was like lightning speed. And we just stop. Like hitting a wall, but not painful kind of stop. And I was surprised. And then I knew that I had to decide, was I going to go over with him and stay, or was I going to go back? And my knee-jerk reaction was, I'm absolutely staying. Everybody over there will be fine. They'll all be here eventually. And I've never been this loved or this safe, and I want to stay here. But it felt like, I don't know, it felt like it was a decision I had made before or something, that this wasn't it and I wasn't done, and that I needed to go back. And I really didn't want to. I mean, I suffered with really bad, depression afterwards, homesickness over having to leave. And I did not want to go. And then God kind of just, I don't know, just gave me this challenge. And I thought to myself, could I go back? Could I go back? Could I do it better? Could I try? And I wondered about that. Could I try? Could I go back? And could I bring all of that back with me and just kind of let the love of God shine out, and leak out of me and onto everybody else, and like I was supposed to the first time. And I thought, I don't know if I can do it, but I could try. And as soon as I thought that, the lights started backing up and I could feel myself coming away from it. And I got really worried and very tearful. And I was like, wait, don't go yet. And I said, you have to let me remember it, because if I don't remember it, I know I won't have any hope when I go back. And I woke up and I was in my body and I was off the ventilator. And I remember my first thought was, oh my God, I'm heavy, because it's so weird to be light. And I'm in there, and the nurse is sitting beside the bed, and she said, oh, you're back. And the first words out of my mouth were, I was with God. And she's like, oh, that's good, honey. And I'm like, no, really, I was with God. I was with him. And she's like, oh, that's nice. Let me get your family, And so and I'm in a faith-based hospital. And when I had told the doctor that, he sent in psych to talk to me because I must be crazy. And my family comes in, and they come in one at a time, and they're all glad I'm back and that I didn't die. And in that moment, I was glad about it too, despite the fact that wasn't what I wanted. And it was just weird. So here I have this opportunity to do it again and do it right, or at least try to. And I kind of only half-heartedly committed to it. And so we figured out that what I had was a condition called eosinophilic asthma with mast cell activation, which is a terrible diagnosis to have because there's not a whole lot they can do to stop it. And so 17 more times I would go into complete respiratory failure. I would have, from the time I took that epinephrine shot, I would have about 20 minutes before I needed to be intubated. All it did was buy me enough time to get on the vent. And nothing we were doing was working. And so the last time that it happened, I decided I was done and that I wasn't going to go back and have a normal life. And I mean, being on the ventilator 18 times in 2.5 years, you're in the hospital more than you're out. And it was just destroying my whole life. I'd gained almost 100 pounds on steroids, and it was just awful. I was just sick all the time. I hurt all the time. My lungs, the last time I was on, the doctor said, you will never survive it again. And they wanted to trach me, and I had said no. But so that last time I went back up there and I was with God, and it was just a very brief encounter. And I said, please just take me or heal me, because I can't keep doing this. And I don't know what you're trying to prove or not prove or what's going on here, but I'm just done. And he said, it's not me, it's you. What do you mean it's me? And he's like, you're not doing anything any different. He said, I keep putting opportunities in front of you, people for you to talk to, people for you to love on. And every time I put something in front of you, you say no. And he's like, if you want to live, if you want to feel better, you need to go back and say yes. This is on you. And I woke up, and it was so funny because my friend Brian, who I knew from a near-death experience group, he had easily asked me 5 or 6 times if I would speak to their IANS group in Cincinnati. And every time I said no. And I have this, you'd never know it to hear me talk, but I have this really bad social anxiety. And so I had always said no. And he called me up after I got out of the hospital. I hadn't been out but a few days. And he said, would you be willing to speak? And before he could even get it out, I said yes. And I couldn't suck it back in. And I was like, oh crap, I just agreed to this. But I didn't. And it was the first time that I had spoken to a group publicly, like stood in front of them and talked to them. And it went so well. And then I spoke to, he also has a group for people who've lost children. And so I spoke to that group, and every time anybody has asked ever since, I've always said yes. And I've not been back in the hospital once. Not for that anyway. I've had like a surgery, but other than that, I've been healthy. And so it was quite a thing. And so I've been working on kind of taking down the wall, and it's not an overnight thing. It's a choice you make every day to pull down a brick. And I feel like it's opened up so much in my life, so many opportunities that I would have never had before. And I've been able to just love on so many people, and I was telling you guys that I had COVID and I was really sick with it. And I didn't go to the hospital because I didn't want to go on the ventilator. And I almost died at home from it. But through that, and it's just amazing to me what good can come from bad. Through that, I somehow developed this huge Facebook following, because every day I would get on just to do an update on my condition so that I didn't have to get a bunch of phone calls because I was having so much trouble breathing. And I had signed a do not intubate order. I did not want to go back on the ventilator. So if I was going to die from COVID, I wanted to do it at home. And I would get on and I would just do these posts. And some days I was better than others. And I decided that I wanted something good to come of it if I was going to die. And it looked like I was for a while. And so I started teaching people about it. I started teaching them about how the virus works and what could we do to prevent it that would be helpful. And pretty soon I had thousands of people watching this video or these daily updates, and people's kids standing in their living rooms and singing songs for me and sending them to me, and just, cards and gifts, and all these people loving on me that didn't even know me. They'd never even met me, from around the world. And it was just, it's so funny because I started to try to be helpful. I wanted to do that. I wanted to tell that story because I thought, here's a nurse who has COVID. There are people in the country that don't have it there yet. And this is a really interesting perspective to me as a nurse, it would be anyway. And I just got to speak rationally to people and calm all these, terrible anxieties that people had just from having the news on all the time, and kind of this fear stoked all the time. And it became this intimate relationship with all of these people. And I've talked, I don't know how many of them, through the death of a loved one from COVID, and trying to advocate for people who are their family members in the hospital and they can't get any information, and they can't go, and they can't visit, and they can't get the doctors to do anything. And so I've worked with them to try to advocate care for their family. And I've watched a bunch of them die, and it's been hard, and I would have said no. Before the near-death experience, I would have said, no, I'm not getting in all that. There's nothing I can do. I can't help. It's just going to be sad. But I got to tell you, walking through that with people, even as hard as it is, I don't know how it's okay, and somebody said, just thank you so much. You didn't have to do this. And I know it's been hard for you. And I said, you know what? Somehow loving you heals me. And it's just true. You walk people through the scariest, darkest moment of their life. And I know this as a nurse, I've been at the bedside of people that have died and their families as we stop the ventilator or whatever. And there is this intimate connection, and you build such a rapport with people by just being willing to walk through it with them. Even if you've got nothing helpful that you can do, just walking through it, and it's just opened me up as a person, as hard as it's been to be a part of. There's no way I could say that it's not been for my benefit or theirs. And I've got lifelong friendships with people that I'll never probably meet, but I'm just so invested in them. And it's just a much better life to live. It really is. But I wanted to read you guys something. So when I woke up that first night on the ventilator, and I'll make this quick because I know we're running long. When I woke up that first night on the ventilator, or off the ventilator, let me find this. God had given me this message, and I was supposed to give it to other people, but that felt really weird to me because I'm not one of those people that's like, hey, God's got something for you, because that just feels creepy and weird to me. And he does that to me sometimes, and it really weirds me out. I'll be at church or somewhere out in public, and God will start nagging me. And he's like, hey, go over there and talk to that person. And I'm like, absolutely not. I don't know who they are, and I'm not doing that. I'm not going to look like an idiot. And he just pushes and pushes and pushes. And then I start feeling really nervous. I always know it's him, because if it's me, I'll just do it. But if it's him, I'm like, there's like that lady over there probably would be happy to do it. And like, she talks at church and stuff. So you should ask her, because she would be much better at it. And he just keeps pushing me, and my hands will start shaking, and then I'll start feeling nauseous the harder I refuse. And finally I'm like, oh, fine, I'll go do it, And so I'll go over and say, I just feel like you've been going through a hard time, or something's been rough for you. And I just wanted to reach out to you and let you know that somebody cares. I know I don't know you. I don't know what's going on. And then they unload this story that is, and in that moment they did need somebody to reach out. But typically I am resistant of such things, because it feels really weird and not preachy, but I don't know. It feels like something you would see in a weird movie about somebody who thinks that, that's schizophrenic, that has some weird God thing going on, and they're going around giving messages. And I've had patients who've done that. They get in that thinking when they're really sick and not taking their medicines, and they say things that scare other people, and it's just part of their illness. And I thought, this is what people are going to think. They're going to think that I'm not okay. But anyway, he came back to me that night. So the nurse made everybody leave. And because she said I was tiring out, she didn't want me to end up back on the ventilator that night. And everybody left. And for the first time, they turned the lights off in that ICU. If you're a nurse, you work in an ICU, turn the lights off at night. That, like, your eyes don't always close all the way when you're on the ventilator. And those fluorescent lights burn your retinas. Like I would see green and red rods for days from my eyes being partway open and seeing that light. But he came back into the room, and it scared me. And I said to God, so this light's like in the room, and I can feel his presence is there. And I jumped and like yelled a little bit because it startled me, and he laughed. And it was funny, because I kind of had it in my head that since I wasn't up there in the light with him, that he was gone, and there he was in the room. And it just sort of freaked me out. And he laughed because he thought it was funny, and it was funny. But I was supposed to give this message, and I had written this about it. I said, I didn't give it before, but I will now, because the world needs a measure of hope, and who am I to deny it? And God had also told me for me to keeping it to myself was theft. And I'm not a person who steals, so I couldn't do it. So he said to me, such folly to think anything escapes my knowing, as when you were with me, all at once, all that I allowed you to know, you knew. No words were spoken, nor were they shouted. I whispered them to your spirit. I discreetly filled you with knowing. Knowing flowed into you as effortlessly as taking a breath. Is it not so? The great I am. No truer words have ever been spoken or written. The great I am is in your core. The great I am is the light. Even when I'm hidden, still I am. As my energy charged, sending me over every synapse in your brain, even those small fibers knew that I am. They rose and fell to the rhythm I created, to the symphony I composed, I conducted. I consider it a tragic comedy of arrogance when man denies what the smallest innervation knows. Man thinks he acts and moves outside my knowledge. How could it be so? I proclaim he does not. His own fibers clutch themselves laughing at the idea. I am the flower, the wind, the rain, the sinew, the marrow, the rock, the author, the maker, the touch that set in motion all that you see, all that you know, and all that you do not see or know. I knit you. I put breath in you. I'm encoded in every cell. Every nanosecond of time falls in step as I will it so. I am in you. I am in you. I am all. Even when you perceive nothing, still there I am. Even as I tell you this here and now, I press my truth into your breast, your very heart pressing it further in. It was just such a sweet message, and I don't know, he's good that way. I do like that he just has this, that kind of infatuation that you have with somebody when you first meet them, your partner, your spouse or whatever. And you just can't get enough of them. And everything they say is just delightful. And you know what they smell like. And, when I had COVID done and I couldn't be together. And so I took one of his shirts that had his cologne on and I slept in it because it was so hard to be completely isolated for 53 days. And, not even be able to get a hug when you felt so bad. And he's like that. He's that infatuated with us, it's like a mom, you pick your kids up and you smell their hair. And I can remember picking my kids' clothes up, and I could tell who'd worn the shirt just by the way it smelled, because they each have their own, I don't know, their own flower that comes off of them, and I just, as a mother, it. And he's like that, he just is absolutely infatuated with us, and it doesn't go away after a month or a week or a year. Every day that he sees us, he's like, wow, you are awesome. I did a good job with that one. And he means it about everybody, every person that he sees. Look at that. I did a good job with that one. That one doesn't know it yet. It doesn't know how much potential he's got or she's got. But that's good work right there. And I don't know, I just think it's so cool that somebody that none of us, have really met or can understand is that wild about us. Just a beautiful thing. But that's it.
Penny, we have a number of people here. That was, wow, you did all that in 1 hour.
I know, I'm getting better at it. You've watched my videos, I'm terrible long-winded.
Actually, I was getting worried there for a while. I thought, oh my God, she's going to go 3 hours. But
no,
beautifully done. And I would just like to open it up and let people ask questions. I'm sure there might be one or two.
Sure.
So.
And if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, just make sure that you're unmuted, and then just you jump in, or if you want to raise your hand and be called on, Pete and I are happy to call on you.
And it's a safe place. I won't, there's nothing, as a nurse, there's nothing you could say. Well, sometimes people shock me a little bit, but I'm good at pretending I'm not shocked. So.
Well, I have a question. Do you ever think anything mean about anybody anymore?
Yes, but I catch myself. That's one of the hardest things, I think, to learn to get hold of your own self-critical thoughts and your critical thoughts of other people. And it's an exercise. You do it every day. And, with as much turmoil that's going on in the world today, it's really hard because I just see things and I'm like, oh my gosh, what is wrong with people? And, people hurting other people. Why would you physically hurt another person? And it is very hard for me not to be just kind of consumed with anger about that. And so I have to kind of limit how much of that stuff I let go in my head because ultimately I can do what I can do where I am. And as far as it goes with me, I do try to do all of those things that I can do where I see there's need or there's a problem or there's somebody that needs help or is fearful. I intervene every time that I can. And I cannot fix things that are going on all over the world, but I can make a huge impact on my own street, in my own town. And I think it is important that we are advocates and that we try to understand people's frustrations and motivations and, make sure everybody, as far as we're concerned, has this sort of equal access and equal rights to basic things like safety. And so that's been a struggle in our, where I've been sick with COVID, where I was sick for so long and I didn't see people. It was really easy because there was a whole lot of getting mad at people you could do from your bedroom.
Right.
I mean, I was a little mad with our governor, but that was it. And I do have to rein that in because that can, really get all over me. I'm like, people need medicine. So I have really had to work to kind of not let, because I'm a passionate person. I'm my grandmother's for sure. And injustice just goes all over me. Like if I see someone else treating someone unfairly, it's really hard to get hold of my tongue and I'll write a big thing because I'm not short for words. And now I have a rule that I have to sit on that for 48 hours before I'm allowed to post it anywhere. Because I really want to let some mean people have it, but I'm trying to remember we're all a product of our environment and not everybody knows everything. And not everybody's experienced unconditional love. So it is harder to behave in a way that shows that.
Yeah.
But it's work.
Yeah.
I promise it's
sure.
work.
And what you're saying reminds me of something that I've gotten the impression of from a lot of other near-death experiencers, my own experiences, that it's kind of like learning how to meditate. you know, and you sit there and try to focus on your breath, and before you know it, your mind is off doing something, and you have to bring it back, and you have to bring it back thousands of times.
Yes.
And gradually we become better at staying in that place of concentration. And I think it's like that, having, bringing, catching myself when I'm less than loving, and
Yes.
trying to find a way back to love.
It's absolutely a practice. I mean, you do have to do it. And I would submit that it is a practice worth your time.
Yeah.
You know, I do have kind of a little visualization that I do when I'm trying to let things go. Or for me, I kind of have to work at staying all the way in my body. It's a little easy for me to pull out now since I've pulled out before. And I
Mhm.
can kind of be completely unaware of my physical, like I can go outside and be freezing cold and Don's like, you need a coat. And I don't even feel that it's cold because it's so easy for me to just kind of pull out. So I
Yeah.
always have to remind myself to stay into my toes. And I, you know, several times a day, I'm like, are you into your toes? Because you know how we get up in our head and you lose track. It's like that, but a little worse.
Mhm.
Um, and so I have to remind myself, you know, that being in your head all the time isn't a great place to be. And it is good to be able to let those thoughts go. So I kind of have this little visualization where if I'm trying to pray or meditate, I visualize myself sitting there with like 100 balloons, because that's how many times I'm going to have to do it. And every time a thought pops up, I'll let it go like it's one of the balloons. And then I'll start thinking about balloons and ribbon and helium. And is it bad for the environment? And then your head goes there. It is an exercise for sure.
Yeah. What about after effects from your NDE? Any other changes that you've noticed in yourself that you really attribute to the NDE, not to the physical stuff that went on, but something that really changed in you or changed the way you function?
Like
Um,
personality or physical or both or
yeah, yeah, anything.
um, it, I would say there's less physical things now. I definitely have a lot more sensitivities to things, things that wouldn't have bothered me before. It's not quite like an allergy, but I'm just a lot more likely to not react well to a food or I don't know. That's weird. And I've heard other people say it. I don't know what there is to that.
I don't
And
either, but I also have heard it. Mhm.
yeah, I kill electronics without meaning to. It used to be right after the experience, like in that first 2 years, we couldn't go out and go past a street light, you know, so we'd go out driving at night and I'd kill at least two street lights as soon as we passed them. And Don was like, no, you're just noticing it. And I'm like, notice when you go out by yourself. And he's like, I went out by myself and no street lights went out. And I'm like, it happens to me all the time. And my mom had a near-death experience. And she cannot wear a watch. She kills every watch she wears. So I guess that's sort of a common thing. And then I don't know, I'm way more emotional. I would have never cried in front of strangers before. And as nurses, we get pretty good at kind of compartmentalizing those sorts of feelings and setting them aside so we can be productive.
Mhm.
But man, I'm a hot mess. I mean, especially since COVID, I've gotten on and cried about people who have died that I didn't know. And I feel things so much more deeply. It was hard on our marriage, you know, that first, we weren't married right after we've only been married 3 years, but we were together then. And Don was really worried. His parents were both Methodist ministers. And I mean, they met at seminary here in Kentucky. His mom was from Argentina. She was here going to seminary. And I remember how hard it was for us after that, because I was kind of questioning everything about my faith and religion. And, you know, and I had grown up Catholic, but I would have considered myself a Christian after that. And I don't know, there was just a bunch of things that I saw where people were being really judgy and mean, and I was having a hard time with it. And Don came home one day and our relationship was not going well. And I had read PMH Atwater's book, and she was talking about how 70% of people who have a near-death experience end up divorced afterward. And so he came into the room and he was really upset. And he said, you know, I just am waiting to walk into the house one day and you to have shaved your head and be dressed like a Buddhist monk. And I just looked at him and I said, could you not love me if that happened? And it caught him. And I said, 70% of people end up losing their relationship after a near-death experience. Is the fact that I was with God going to be something that a Christian man can't get over? And it changed everything for us. It changed our whole relationship. We are so much better because of it, because we decided that it was going to be really confusing and there was going to be a lot of things I couldn't understand or process or put words to, because how do you do that? I mean, there's so much I leave out of this story because it would just go on forever trying to explain it. And he finally said to me one day, he looked at me and he said, I've never known you to lie. You are the most honest person I know. And if you say it happened, I believe it happened. And we just kind of went forward from there. I ended up meeting Howard Storm because he just lives, just a stone's throw from us. And it was really cool to talk to another experiencer in person, and not feel like I was crazy and explain all of the things that I still think are really weird that I don't understand. And, for somebody that's so far out from their experience to help me put it in context.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So those things have been definite pluses.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm less worried about things like Dom's really worried about, the fact that most of our kids, despite, having like a faith upbringing, are sort of rejecting that idea of God. And it's really troubling to Don because his parents were both ministers. And I just kind of have this assurance that it works out and, people figure out that they're loved and created, and we don't need to spend our whole lives fretting about it. Just live good lives and love them. And that's the example people need, to know that they're loved and valued. So there's that. Knowing this isn't real, in the sense of, how like when little kids are playing, everything that's going on in their pretend play is very real to them. They're very immersed in it. They take on that role as cowboy or whatever, and it is as real to them as anything else. And, we dare not tell them otherwise because they deserve to have that just, all-encompassing fantasy. But when I got out of this, first of all, the time thing is just so crazy because there everything is instantaneous, all at once, without chaos, and seemingly very long, but fast at the same. It's so hard to describe the time. And here, like when I looked back on my life here, it felt like I had barely taken a breath and I was gone from it. And there, there was thought creation. If I had a thought, I didn't even have to speak it. I would get an answer. And so when I got back in my body, it was crazy frustrating, just the physical and mental effort that there was to get anything accomplished. I had a lot of problems. So where I'd had so much deoxygenation of my brain over those episodes, but even the first one, it took me a while to come back cognitively. So I had problems with speech. I would do these kind of word blends because I couldn't figure out how to say words. So I would want to say remember and memory, and I would put it together and call it remembry, which is very cute. But as an adult, you look silly when you say that. So yeah, I had a bunch of those word mixing things. My brain got totally messed up and rerouted. So we started realizing that if I would look at things and we were talking about them, I would misname them. And so I would look at a cow and I would think belt. I could think of something that would come from the hide, but I couldn't think of what the animal was called. Or I would look at chocolate and I would think cup. And so I had a lot of therapy to help me figure out how to get back around to those words. And it was interesting because the picture would be in the middle of the page and I could put a line on the page and start making circles around the picture and start saying all the words that I thought that picture was. And eventually, in enough circles, I would get back to what the word was. And it was like I was winding through my brain trying to narrow down what it was. And I found life to be so, so taxing and frustrating. And, that any little thing that I wanted to do just took a huge amount of effort, and it took forever. And explaining things to people and trying to get them to understand without thinking you're crazy and you've not had, I've had how long to process this? It's just now. It took 3 years to even come up with a lucid explanation for it. So yeah, it changes a lot of things. It is very hard to stay grounded. It gets easier the further out I get. Like at about the 3-year mark, it got easier. But I can totally relate to, especially when things get scary or hard here, just that want to just kind of pull out and disassociate from it. So it is something I have to work on. And I totally get that you struggle with it too. Man, I was an idiot when I was 19. I just was. I didn't know anything. I thought I knew everything. And that's part of the idiot, not just that I didn't know things, but that I was sure I knew everything. And when you have something so pivotal happen, I've talked to people who've had experiences as children, and it seems like if they have it really young, like when they're under 6 years old, they process it better. But people that I know that have had experiences as teenagers, I know some people that had experiences related to suicide attempts, different things. And they've really struggled with it a lot of their life. And I think it's because you're at this pivotal point in your development that is so difficult anyway. Just life on earth when you're 19 is just super confusing and loaded with a bunch of emotions that calm down with time. And then you add the biggest thing that can happen to a person outside their body. I think a lot of people get this idea that once you've had a near-death experience, things here, make a lot more sense or a lot easier. And in some respects, yes. But, I still sat and cried on video in front of a bunch of people because my friend Derek, whose dad I don't even know, died despite all of our best efforts to try to get him appropriate medical care. And it just, for a week, I was useless. I was absolutely useless. I was working on an NDE documentary, and I finally did a video and I sent it to the person because I really respect the person, the filmmaker. And I was just, I was telling him why I was having a hard time and that I'd done this video so many times and I couldn't get through it without crying. And I'm like ugly crying, something you don't want on Amazon Prime. And, and finally I just thought I got to get honest with this guy and not put him off for reasons that aren't real. And I have to tell him what's going on with me. And so I just kind of sat down and talked to the camera and I said, finally I got to the point and I'm like, and he died. And I just went to pieces, and I sent it to him. And, so I think it does sometimes surprise people that things still hit us really hard, but I think you're softer after that happens, and your heart's more tender and it is easier to get heard.
Ritu, you have your hand up?
How do you see that?
Go ahead.
Yes.
Oh, there she is. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So a couple of questions I have, Penny. Just such a riveting story. I have not heard one explained like this before. One thing, I'm really curious to know how the 72 cents for that lady, a little bit more of how that really transformed her life. And second one is if you have any insight into when you send hurtful thoughts or angry thoughts to people who have really, really hurt you very badly, like how does, because you don't mean to, you may want to forgive them, but you're hurting. Right. And sometimes part of the psychological process, if you do happen to figure it out ever in this lifetime, is that you visualize you go back to that place and then you bring that person in and you unleash it on them. And so I have that when I suggested to many people, they cringe because they think they are actually, sending really bad thoughts to that person. And it's like, but how else do you get out of it? But some people go through entire life just being angry, and really don't even have the agency to figure out how they can ever release it. So what are they having to face in their afterlife review?
Well, what a smart question. I think to say that, you're just not going to have negative thoughts about people is crazy, because of course you are. There are some really crappy people out there. I've met them. I've seen them on TV. I know about it. And I think the fact that people hurt other people, and I've been on the receiving end of that, it creates natural feelings of, just you being hurt and feeling out of control and not being able to stop that. And somebody just taking this control away from you, when they hurt you. And I think you can acknowledge all of those things, and you have to, because people are definitely mean and behave in bad ways. And so I think to say that I don't want to come across like, oh, well, you just have to forgive them, because that is a process. And you do, so for example, when I was in college in Texas, a boy that I was friends with, I had asked him up to my room and I was going to change clothes so we could go to this football game. I came out of the room, he attacked me and he raped me. And then he stalked me for a while. And I left college because of it. And then he raped 2 more girls before the college finally made him leave. They didn't ever report it to the police, okay? So for years, I had this horrible, I had some pretty rich fantasies about what I wanted to do to him and how I was going to do it and how cruel it was going to be. To me, that is different. That is you working through a process. That's different than me, seeing something in the world and just sitting around hating that person. So somebody does cut you off in traffic, or somebody does, says something mean to your kid, or whatever, these just infractions that happen in life. To just sit around and think, I kind of have to put a tone to it. So like, I don't know how to say your name. Is it Ritu? Ritu. So if you had done something, I don't know what, that pissed me off at work, right? And I'd be like, that Ritu, she's just terrible. She didn't even do her job very well. I didn't even see her bring her stethoscope. That's what I'm talking about. That kind of judgy, I'm just being, pardon my language, a bitch to you. That's different than that guy that hurt me, that took all of my power away, that tortured me. That's different than me working through some murderous thoughts about him. That's part of me working through it, trying to, in my own mind, take some of my power back. And I don't actually have any negative feelings about him anymore. Now, that's been a long time ago. I've had a long time to work through it. And I probably could actually sit down with him at this moment and just have a conversation about how that shaped my life. That said, I don't think I would change it. It made me a person, it made me who I am, and it made me very compassionate to people who have been through that in a way that I couldn't have been had I not been through it myself. And so, though it was tragic and awful and terrible, I do think that there was a higher lesson to be learned. And I try not to shun. I think we get in this thought process of everything positive is good and everything negative is bad. And that is just not true. Everything that moves you forward is good, whether it's positive or negative. And so I think probably just allowing yourself to have your real feelings of negativity and hurt is different than me just being judgy and catty about somebody. So let me re-clarify that. I feel like I didn't explain that well. And I do try to remember, like if you had been crappy to me at work, I do try to think to myself, okay, now, generally she's a really nice person. And like when my husband and I get in a fight, we still fight. And I think, okay, yes, that was a crappy thing to say. And he's definitely wrong. But I know his overall character, and he is a good man, and he does love me. And I try to put everything in that light. So yeah, I don't think that's, I think I should have said that better. As far as the 72 cents, that was crazy because I had completely forgotten about that woman. But I remember standing next to her in that store, like when you know how your kids will remind you of a story or your family member will, and you're like, oh yeah. It was weird. It was like I was in her when she was doing these things. And I don't know if that was a future view or if that was just symbolic, because I have no way of verifying any of that. But she was standing in this food pantry, and there was like a kitchen countertop in front of her, and there were these shelves behind her that were stocked like sequentially with different things. And there was a woman that came in, and she was a Hispanic lady, and she had these 3 little kids, and she didn't speak very good English. And this lady that I had helped was putting these groceries in the cart, and I could just feel her every time she would put something in the cart. I could feel her paying that love back. And you could just see how just that little kindness changed her life. And she didn't have more. I had no impression that she was doing any better in life financially, but she was more because of it. She took that lack, basic lack of things that a person should not have to want for. This woman wasn't buying 10 cases of pop. She was buying basic groceries. And she took that, even though she wasn't doing any better, and found a way to give back. And I just thought, man, she's a better person than I am. I just was watching her pay that forward, that little thing. When I was in my 20s, and it took me this long to figure all that out, I just thought, well, what a wise person she is. And I have to say, it's interesting because talking about this has put so many people in my life that are the ages that my grandparents would have been. And so I lost my grandmother really young, and my other grandmother died when I was 18. So I never had that sense of grandparents and wisdom and roots that I would have loved to have had. And now I've met all these people that are, 70 to 90, and they have so lovingly poured into my life with wisdom. And I mean, they don't have to do that. And I just see us kind of pushing away our older population as though they have nothing to offer and their dreams went away because they got old or whatever. And I just love talking to them, and I love listening to their stories, and they are so willing to add back to someone else's life. And I don't know, I feel like that's part of my thing going forward, is to bring value back to that amazing generation that, I don't know, I feel like largely is shut away. That kind of hurts my heart. I guess it really came to light with COVID because we lost so many elderly people. And I just thought, gosh, there's a book that just closed, there's a story I'll never hear. Some life lesson that would have been so helpful, and it's just gone now. So yeah, those really, really affect me, and I get angry about that. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you.
Don't guilt yourself. It's a process. You got it. I can tell you have a good heart. You have a nice spirit.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. My mother-in-law the first time I went to her house, it was before we were married, Don went in the other room with his dad, and I was sitting in there with his mom, and she was just starting to get just a little bit confused at that time. We've lost her since, but I was sitting at the table with her, and she, like I said, she was from Argentina, little, just cutest, just put her in your pocket. She's so sweet. And she looked at me and she said, "You love my Donnie. I can see it." And I said, "I do." And then we were sitting there talking, and she just stopped all of a sudden. Weirdest thing that's ever happened to me. And she said, "Oh, querida, your spirit is so big. It shines all around you." And I thought, that is the most beautiful thing any human being has ever said to me in my life. And I'm so glad that I got to her before she had, completely gotten lost in dementia, because I try to live by that. I try to live up to that. I think that's a huge mark to set for yourself. And I thank her for saying that to me, because it does make me think twice before I use my words.
Oh, that's beautiful.
You'd have loved her. She was wonderful. When she passed, it was Christmas Eve. Don was in Michigan with her, and I was here because I think I'd just gotten off the vent, and I couldn't go. And at 3:40 in the morning, I woke up because I felt her go past. I've known a lot of people, like I've known they were going to die before they died, or that something was going to happen. And when Mary Melba died, I just have to tell you, it was the first time that's happened to me where the world felt emptier. And I sat up in the bed, and I'm like, oh, I felt her, like wind went past my face. And I called Don and I said, "She's gone." And he said, "She just died. She got dementia really early into our relationship, but man, I love that woman."
Mm.
Beautiful soul. I can't wait to see her again.
I have a question.
Sarah.
Hi.
Hi.
Do you think that, you said God is like really naggy, like he pushes you, say it, say it, say it, right? Do you think that he frequently speaks through us and maybe sometimes not without our knowledge?
Yes. I think one of the coolest things that's happened to me since the near-death experience is I'm able to sort out what's me and what's God. What's kind of this spirit of God in me pushing me to do something, because it was really hard before. So I've always had that. I think we all do, like this sort of, like that. You'll pull into a parking lot and you'll kind of get the heebie-jeebies, and you talk yourself out of it. You're like, no, it's fine. I'll park by the light. Every time I have ignored that in life, something bad has happened to me. I ignored it the night I got raped in college. I ignored it the night that a guy tried to attack me in a school parking lot. Every single time. And finally, I grew a brain and was like, hey, maybe that thing is right, And so I remember pointing it out to my kids. I'm like, you'll have this feeling inside you like something is not right. Never ignore it. It's this God voice in you. And so it's interesting, like since the near-death experience, kind of at the 3-year mark when I started sorting it out a little bit better. But even initially, something would happen in there that I definitely would have attributed to my own craziness before. I would have said, oh, you're just being weird, or or, you know, you're taking this idea and you're going to act on it. And that's just your internal dialogue. Now I know when it's him and when it's me. And it's so helpful because now I know
You're right.
I'm not just doing something stupid that's going to look crazy, right? So
Yeah.
like if God gives me something for somebody, who did it happen to? I think this happened with somebody recently. One of the, there was a girl that had private messaged me. That's what it was. So she had private messaged me about something COVID, and I started talking to her, and God was doing his, you know, push, push, push. And I was like, I'm not going to do this. I don't know this person well. But it doesn't matter if I know him well or not, because if I do know him, I say I'm not going to do it either. So that excuse is ridiculous. And because I'm like, I have to like run into this person. I'm not going to do it because I couldn't just avoid them like I could on Facebook if I said something stupid. And so I just kept getting pushed and pushed and pushed. And it was her mom and her grandmother. And she had lost her grandmother young. And I just started physically describing her. I could see her. I knew what she looked like. I knew what blouse she had on that had this little scalloped, instead of being pointed at the collar, it was scalloped, and all these things. And she's like, oh my gosh, how could you know that? And I'm like, I could not know that. That's just, and I can't do it at will, nor would I want to. Because when it first started happening right after the near-death experience, it was always scary stuff. It was knowing how somebody was murdered and feeling it as though it were happening to me. I couldn't separate myself out from it. And I did not like that. That, you know, there was a man that got shot and I knew where he got shot in his head because I could feel it in my head. And I didn't like that. And there was a man that was burned in his house alive and I could feel the smoke in my own lungs. And I was like, okay, I don't know what that is, but I'm pulling back from it because it's not good for me. You know, not all things we know are in our best interest. And so I really had to kind of push those memories away, and that's what they felt like memories, like it had happened to me, but I knew it was the other person. But now it's more like, you know, God is in on something that I'm not in on, and he needs me to kind of step out and just be his love to somebody. And so now there is that tendency in me to question it, and by questioning it, not have to do it. It's just an accountability thing. I'm like, well, if I just say it's me, then he doesn't know, right? But I still try to scam him for some reason. I don't know what it is about human nature. And so, yeah, like recently when it happened, I was like, oh no, that's just me, just because I care about this person. And then I know I'm not lying to anybody that would believe it. And so I'm like, okay, fine, I'll do it. And it always works out. I don't know why it is so scary to me. I guess because it's weird to put yourself out there like that. You know, and people are like, oh, you're psychic. And I'm like, no, please don't use that word. I hate that word. It just brings up crystal balls. And I'm like, no, God can give a word of knowledge to anybody for somebody else. And some of us are just a little better at sorting out that that's not our own dialogue and that is from, you know, his spirit. So, but I hope that answered that.
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Just do it. If you feel it, just do it.
Right.
Yeah,
That's kind of
really
what
hard.
I'm feeling after hearing that or taking your advice. Thank you.
You'll have to like reach out and let Pete or Janice know if you do it, because I so want to hear about it and how weird it felt to you. And
so going off of that question about like going up to people and feeling nervous about it, I'm wondering if you like normally get some kind of sign from the person that what you're doing is like acceptable, or if you ever like approach someone and there's the voice of God and then the person just like doesn't show any sign that what you're saying is hitting, or like they're kind of like really, you know, nervous about you approaching them. I'm wondering if that's
happened in your own life?
No.
So I always try to be really conscious of how I'm coming across, because it does sound crazy. It's just weird to have somebody come up to you and do that. And so a lot of times it'll happen when I'm having a Facebook discussion with somebody. So I always kind of put it out there and put the weird thing out there so that they know that I know it's weird, because that makes it seem a little less crazy to them. So, you know, you're not this person that would normally do this. And so I always kind of lead with, I know this is going to sound crazy. And if it makes you uncomfortable, just let me know and I'll stop. But I just feel like I need to share this with you. And I kind of go that route. And so since they know that I know it's weird, they don't think I'm crazy, because I kind of would be of the opinion, if I didn't know this person, that they might be crazy if they did that. It's just one of those things that we think. Because here, this person you don't know is now telling you things about your life that they shouldn't know, or have any way of knowing, and they're approaching you on Facebook. It doesn't, thank goodness it's not happened like face to face a bunch, because I just don't know if I could deal with that kind of nervous anxiety. But it has happened in church a couple of times, and I have requested that God ask someone else, and he never does. He's like got this incredible sense of humor. And I always try to, like when there's been a few times it's happened in public, I try to be very thoughtful about that person's time. Are they trying to rush out of church or rush to somewhere? Because I can save it. I can write it down for later when it's a more intimate setting and they're not going to feel uncomfortable. If it's for a man, I try not to ever do that in a situation that would make his wife feel uncomfortable. Because if you know something about her husband that you shouldn't know, she's always going to wonder how you knew that thing. And you don't want her to get this impression that you have internal knowledge about her husband, because that makes wives very uncomfortable. So I'm very careful with that, because I don't want her to get this, well, who was that woman and how could she know this about you? And have you talked to her before? And so you do have to really test the water before you go for it. And sometimes I've said no. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that, because that's going to make all of those people very uncomfortable, and it's going to be a bad car ride home.
To Nick's question, it sounds like you haven't ever really had the experience of saying something to someone and the person saying, what are you talking about?
Never.
Go away. It's always that they're more surprised or moved that you empathize with something that they're struggling with.
That people generally have, I've had a few, and it's a lot of times it's big stuff that I am like, this is not something I feel comfortable with. So I had a person I did not know. I didn't know his story. I didn't know anything about him. And we were in Facebook. I had never spoken to him before. And God just kept poking me. And I'm like, I am not doing this. I don't know this guy. And I'm not comfortable saying this thing to him. And I just couldn't, he wouldn't quit. And so finally I messaged a person. I'm like, I know this is going to sound crazy. Just tell me to stop if you want, but you lost your daughter. And she was young. And the girl was like 14 or 15. And that is just not something I ever feel comfortable as a first interaction with a person. And thank God he took it well. And we are still very good friends to this day. But it just puts me in a really bad situation. But he really needed to hear that. He needed to hear it. It was very specific to his situation. And I believe that it was very helpful for him, because he was really struggling. It hadn't been long. And so, there are those. And I just hate it when it is something like that. I'm like, could you start small? Be so much better than, hey, I have this sense that you just lost your kid. That's just not a way I like to open any conversation. And then the other one that was really weird was somebody that I had gone to elementary school with that had recently Facebook friended me. And I didn't know anything about her life since we hadn't gone to school anymore. I moved when I was 14. And I just felt God pushing and pushing and pushing, and I didn't want to do it. And so I tried to gain some rapport with her first, talk to her about what, how had her life been? And, did she have kids? Was she married? All this different stuff. Actually, I didn't ask if she was married. And then one day it just kept pushing and pushing, and I had to say it. And I'm like, you're using drugs, and it's going to end up killing you. And and I could see her mother, and she was in the kitchen and she was throwing rolls to people. And that was a very specific thing for her, because her mom would do that. She would stand at the stove and put them all in a bowl. And then she would say, who wants a roll? And she would throw them to them. And she pinched people. And so I could see that. And I said, you're ruining your life. You're ruining your life. And your kid is now in trouble because you've taught him this. And that didn't go well at all. She ended up getting in a car accident. She got into drugs worse. And I will always feel like I had a part in that. And ultimately it is her choice to make. And she probably was going to go that route anyway, because she wasn't stopping. But still, it was very soon after. And so that's why I've pushed a lot of the big stuff to the side. I don't know. I get that God has got something big to say, but I just always feel like I have a certain amount of culpability for how that turns out. So I try to be really gentle with it. And I didn't like just come out and nail her with it. I'm like, something's going on in your life that you're ashamed of, that you're hiding. Nothing is hidden. And eventually all these things come to light, and it's very difficult. And it would just be better if you got ahead of this and did something proactive to correct it than got forced into it because of a very negative situation. And she's like, no, that's not happening. I don't know what you're talking about. Everything's good. And then finally I just had to do the blurt.
Well,
But, she may be okay today. I don't know.
yeah. And I wonder whether if you hadn't said anything and then she had gone and done the car accident and all that stuff, if you wouldn't wonder, if I had said something, at least I would have given her the opportunity, and you gave her an opportunity to look at herself. And I think that's what.
You're right. I would have thought maybe if only I'd told her that, she wouldn't have had anything happen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's a good point.
you did what you could, and you did it out of love. And you can't control what she doesn't do with the information.
Yeah, some people are just on a demolition course, and it's very hard to pull them back. And maybe that's
it's part of their path.
It's a hard life to watch, though. It's really hard to watch people that have so much promise. And we lost my cousin last year, and it was just devastating. None of us knew any of this was going on, and I was very close with him and didn't know. And I think, man, of all the things I didn't know, that I've known that I didn't want to know, why couldn't it have been that?
Yeah.
Just not the way it works sometimes.
So,
Ritu, I'll finish up, and you can maybe go ahead.
okay, so quickly, coming to time travel, and Penny, so since you saw a future event, so how is that disorienting for you sometimes, or what's your perspective on knowing that many of the events have already happened, because that's why you were able to see it, and that we are now catching up to what's already happened. And then what Janice had mentioned, there is always a potential. So there's destiny versus free will. So some of it has already happened and some can be changed. How do you reconcile?
I don't. For me, I'm just enjoying the mystery. I do think that we see some things, and, I think even as moms, we're all a little bit of time travelers. You see that, the glass of milk's going over, it. And your husband can't see it, and nobody else can see it, but it, and you move the milk. And when you don't move the milk, it falls. And so, you see a future where the milk is going to fall, and somehow you get there and you stop it. And I think life is just a lot like that. Sometimes you get to those moments and sometimes you don't, and they play out the way you thought they would have if you hadn't seen it. You know what I mean? I just think people ask me questions all the time. They're like, well, why suffering, and why this, and why that? And I'm like, there are just some mysteries. And I'm really okay with that. It used to really bother me, and I felt like I needed to understand everything. But I think the more you understand, the more you try to control. And you get kind of caught up in controlling, or trying to control, or having this perception of control, that you are not present in your life and experiencing things as they're happening every moment. I would rather not know the things that are coming. I don't so much mind God giving me a word for someone else's life that is really needed in that moment. I don't mind that so much, because that's not me seeing what's happening for me. That's just something they need to hear. I just don't want to know. And I think God gives us confirmations. So something will happen. If you watch for it, you'll see it. These kind of synchronistic things that happen. So, like me being with God that last time, and him saying, you have to say yes. I'm putting people in your path. I'm putting opportunities. You have to say yes. And the first phone call I get when I get home is my friend with an opportunity to speak. And I say yes. And so God, of course you could say, well, any opportunity could have come up, but I just think those are little validations, and it links to something in your head, and you think, that's weird. I was just thinking about doing that, or thinking about calling that person. And then there's a little validation somehow. Don't ignore it, because there is something to that. And I think a lot of times we choose to let it go because we think it's just silliness or craziness or internal dialogue or whatever. But I would encourage you when it's most uncomfortable to step out and do it, because it is weird how it always turns out in some really cool way. But we do choose it. I could have not gone to that soccer game that day and not heard that.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have never known that it had happened, that he had made that decision in his own mind. So it was because of a choice I made that I actually got to see it come to pass. I didn't even know it was future. I thought it was just symbolic. So yeah, I don't want to know.
Oh, thank you.
I hope that helps.
Thank you. Yes.
So is it about time for us to close
I
tonight?
think it is.
It is.
Too. Yeah. So, Penny, I just want to echo what Pete said. I'm so grateful for your presence with us tonight and the love that you just emit, and your spirit is really big, and the love really does come through you. So I felt it. So
That's
thank
a
you
beautiful
so much.
thing to say. Thank you, Janice. I'm so excited for you. I can't wait to hear all your things going forward. You'll have to post it. We'll have to be friends so I can hear about it. I'm living vicariously.
Sounds good.